Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Lysandra Voss, a devoted mother and wife, who appeared to embody the ideal life. With her radiant smile and nurturing demeanor, she was the kind of woman who organized bake sales and volunteered at the local school. Yet beneath this polished exterior lay a complexity that few could fathom, a yearning for something more, something hidden. Lysandra had been married to Gideon Voss for over a decade. They had built a life together filled with shared dreams and aspirations. Gideon was a dedicated architect, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering commitment to his family. Their son, Jasper, was the light of their lives, a bright and curious 12-year-old who loved soccer and science fiction. To the outside world, the Voss family seemed perfect. However, beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. As Lysandra navigated her daily routine, she often felt a sense of restlessness creeping in. The monotony of life weighed heavily on her soul. While Gideon immersed himself in work projects that often kept him late at the office, Lysandra found herself increasingly isolated. She longed for connection and excitement, feelings that had become foreign in her structured existence. It was during one of those long afternoons, when the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays through their kitchen window, that everything changed. Jasper had just returned home from school, bursting with stories about his new teacher, Tamsin. He described her as vibrant and engaging, someone who made learning feel like an adventure. Intrigued by her son's enthusiasm, Lysandra decided to attend the upcoming parent-teacher conference. When the day arrived, Lysandra entered the school's brightly lit hallway with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As she approached the classroom door, she felt an inexplicable flutter in her stomach. Tamsin was everything Jasper had described, charismatic with an infectious laugh that filled the room as she interacted with students and parents alike. Her energy was magnetic, drawing people in effortlessly. During the conference, Lysandra found herself captivated not only by Tamsin's teaching methods but also by her striking presence. There was an unspoken connection between them, a spark that ignited something deep within Lysandra's heart. As they exchanged pleasantries and discussed Jasper's progress, Lysandra felt a rush of emotions she hadn't experienced in years: excitement, curiosity, and an undeniable attraction. The weeks passed quickly as Lysandra's admiration for Tamsin grew into something more profound. They began exchanging friendly messages about Jasper's homework assignments and school events. Each interaction felt electric. Every word exchanged left Lysandra yearning for more. Tamsin's laughter echoed in her mind long after their conversations ended. As autumn descended upon Maplewood, bringing with it a tapestry of vibrant leaves and crisp air, Lysandra found herself drawn into Tamsin's orbit. They began meeting for coffee under the guise of discussing school matters, an innocent pretext that allowed them to explore their growing connection. With each meeting, they shared stories about their lives. Lysandra spoke of her dreams deferred while Tamsin revealed her own struggles as a young teacher trying to make her mark. But it wasn't just friendship blossoming between them, it was an undeniable attraction that neither could ignore. Late-night texts turned into flirtatious banter filled with double meanings and lingering glances that sent shivers down Lysandra's spine. In Tamsin's presence, she felt alive, like she had rediscovered a part of herself that had long been buried beneath layers of obligation and expectation. Yet as their bond deepened, so did the shadows lurking over Lysandra's life. Guilt gnawed at her conscience. She was betraying Gideon's trust without even realizing it fully. The weight of her secret began to feel unbearable as she oscillated between exhilaration and despair. Torn between two worlds, the safety of her family life and the thrill of newfound love, Lysandra grappled with emotions that threatened to consume her. In those moments of quiet reflection at home, when Gideon returned from work exhausted but eager to spend time with Jasper, Lysandra felt like an imposter in her own life. She smiled through dinner conversations while her mind wandered elsewhere. Thoughts of Tamsin danced tantalizingly at the edges of her consciousness. Little did she know that this affair would lead not only to heartbreak but also to tragedy, a chain of events set in motion by choices made in fleeting moments of passion. As autumn faded into winter, the stage was being set for a shocking turn of fate that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. In Maplewood's seemingly idyllic setting, darkness lurked just beneath the surface, a darkness that would soon emerge with devastating consequences for Lysandra Voss and those she loved most dearly. The morning of November 14th dawned cold and gray in town, the kind of day that sent a chill through the bones and wrapped the town in an eerie silence. Lysandra Voss found herself staring out the kitchen window, her heart heavy with the weight of secrets she could no longer bear. The thrill of her affair with Tamsin had begun to morph into a tangled web of guilt and anxiety, but she pushed those thoughts aside as she prepared breakfast for her family. Meanwhile, across town, Gideon Voss was already at his office, poring over blueprints for a new project. He was dedicated to his work, often losing track of time in his pursuit of perfection. His mind was filled with visions of soaring structures and innovative designs, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing at home. At Maplewood Middle School, Jasper was excitedly chatting with his friends about an upcoming soccer match. He had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. The day began like any other. Students shuffled through the hallways, laughter echoed off the walls, and teachers prepared for their lessons. But beneath this facade of normalcy lay a storm waiting to break. As the clock struck noon, chaos erupted at the Voss household. A frantic knock on the door startled Lysandra from her thoughts. She opened it to find Officer Mira Chin standing on her doorstep, her expression grave. Behind her stood Detective Orion Blake, whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the urgency in Myra's eyes. "Mrs. Voss," Mira began, her voice steady but laced with concern. "We need to speak with you about your husband." Lysandra's heart dropped as panic washed over her. "What's happened? Is Gideon okay? May we come inside?" Orion asked gently. Lysandra stepped aside, allowing them into her home, dread pooling in her stomach. She led them to the living room, where they sat across from her on the couch. The air felt thick with tension as she waited for them to speak. "Earlier today," Orion began, "your husband was found deceased in his car." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lysandra felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She struggled to process what she had just heard. "What do you mean? Oh, what happened?" Her voice trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "He was parked at Maplewood Park," Mira explained softly. "It appears he suffered a heart attack." A wave of disbelief washed over Lysandra. Gideon was only 42, fit and healthy, or so she thought. The reality of his death felt surreal. It was as if she were watching a scene unfold in a movie rather than experiencing it herself. "Can I see him?" Lysandra asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "We're still investigating," Orion replied gently. "We need to ask you some questions first." As they probed into Gideon's life, his habits, health history, and relationships, Lysandra struggled to maintain her composure. Each question felt like a dagger piercing through her chest as memories flooded back. Their last argument over dinner, when he had asked why she seemed so distant. His laughter echoing in their home, moments shared that now felt tainted by guilt. After what felt like hours but was likely only 30 minutes, Mira and Orion concluded their questioning and left Lysandra alone in the suffocating silence of her home. She sank onto the couch, feeling utterly lost. The weight of grief crashed down upon her like an avalanche. It threatened to bury her under its enormity. In the days that followed Gideon's death, Maplewood came together to mourn the loss of a beloved member of their community. Friends and neighbors brought food and condolences, but all Lysandra could feel was an overwhelming sense of isolation. She put on a brave face for Jasper's sake, trying to be strong for him while battling her own demons behind closed doors. Jasper took Gideon's death hard. He wandered around their home searching for comfort in memories that now felt bittersweet. Lysandra tried to console him while grappling with feelings of guilt and despair over what had transpired between herself and Tamsin. As they prepared for Gideon's funeral, a somber affair attended by many who loved him, Lysandra found herself haunted by thoughts of Tamsin. Their secret meetings had become a distant memory overshadowed by loss and regret. Yet even amidst this tragedy, she couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling that something more sinister lurked beneath the surface. On the day of the funeral, as friends gathered around them offering support, Lysandra caught sight of Tamsin standing at a distance, her expression unreadable among the crowd. The sight sent a shiver down Lysandra's spine. Memories flooded back of laughter shared over coffee and whispered secrets under starlit skies. But those moments now felt tainted by guilt and fear, the fear that everything would unravel if anyone discovered what had transpired between them during Gideon's absence. As they laid Gideon to rest beneath a canopy of gray skies, Lysandra felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle deep within her soul. A premonition that this tragedy was only just beginning to unfold. The darkness that had crept into their lives would soon reveal itself in ways they could never have imagined, a harbinger of chaos that would change everything forever. The air was thick with tension in Maplewood as Detective Orion Blake and Officer Mira Chen began their investigation into Gideon Voss's unexpected death. The community was still reeling from the shock, and the Voss family was at the center of it all. As they gathered evidence and conducted interviews, it became clear that this case would not be as straightforward as it initially appeared. Detective Blake, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, approached the case methodically. His partner, Officer Chin, was equally dedicated, her background in forensic science lending an analytical edge to their work. Together, they formed a formidable team determined to uncover the truth. Their first stop was the Voss residence. Lysandra greeted them with red-rimmed eyes and a fragile demeanor. She wore a mask of grief that barely concealed her underlying tension. As they entered the home, the scent of fresh flowers mixed with the stale air of sorrow hung heavily around them. "Mrs. Voss," Orion began gently, "we're very sorry for your loss. We have a few questions that we need to ask you." Lysandra nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. Anything I can do to help." "Can you tell us about Gideon's health?" Mira asked, taking notes on her tablet. "Did he have any pre-existing conditions or recent stressors?" Lysandra hesitated, her mind racing back to their last conversations. "He was healthy as far as I knew. Just busy with work. He had been stressed about a project deadline. Did he mention anything unusual lately? Any symptoms?" Orion probed further. "No," she replied, shaking her head slowly. "He seemed fine." As they continued their questioning, Lysandra's answers became increasingly evasive. The detectives exchanged glances. Something felt off. They wrapped up their interview and left her with their condolences, but not before Mira noticed a framed photo on the mantel. A picture of Gideon with Jasper at a soccer game, both beaming with joy. Once outside, Orion turned to Mira. "There's something about her story that doesn't sit right with me." Mira nodded in agreement. "We should dig deeper into Gideon's background, talk to his colleagues and friends." Their next stop was Gideon's workplace, where they spoke with his boss, Martin Hargrove, a gruff man in his 50s who had known Gideon for years. "He was one of our best," Martin said somberly, "dedicated and hardworking. But lately? He seemed distracted, distant." "Distant how?" Orion asked. Martin sighed heavily. "He had been under pressure with this new project, a big deal for our firm. But I didn't think it was affecting him that much." "Did he mention anything about his personal life? Any problems at home?" Mira inquired. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Not really. But I did overhear him arguing with Lysandra once during a phone call, something about being there for Jasper more." Orion took note of this information while Mira pressed further about Gideon's interactions with colleagues. They learned that he had recently been working late nights and had become increasingly withdrawn from social gatherings. As they left the office, Orion's instincts kicked in. There was more to uncover here than just a heart attack. Their next step involved interviewing friends and neighbors in Maplewood who could provide insight into Gideon's life outside of work. They spoke to Clara Jennings, a fellow teacher at Jasper School who had known Gideon for years. "He was such a good father," Clara said wistfully when asked about Gideon's character. "Always involved in Jasper's activities, coaching his soccer team, attending every school event." "Did you notice any changes in him recently?" Mira asked. Clara frowned thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, he seemed more stressed than usual this past month. I remember him mentioning something about needing to talk to Lysandra about their relationship." Orion raised an eyebrow at this revelation. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated before continuing. "He felt like she was pulling away from him, like she had secrets of her own." The detectives exchanged knowing glances. Their suspicions were solidifying around Lysandra's emotional state following Gideon's death. As the investigation progressed over the following days, they gathered more pieces of the puzzle, each interview revealing layers of complexity within the Voss family dynamics that painted an unsettling picture. Orion and Mira returned to the Voss home for follow-up questions but found only Jasper there. Lysandra had gone out for errands. The young boy looked lost without his father, a shadow of his former self. "Jasper," Orion said gently, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze, "can you tell us if your dad ever talked about feeling unwell or stressed?" Jasper shrugged, his eyes filled with sadness. "He just seemed tired all the time, but he always said he loved me." With each piece of information gathered, Detective Blake felt an unsettling sense that this case was spiraling into darker territory than anyone anticipated, a web of secrets woven tightly around Lysandra and Tamsin that could lead them down a path neither had prepared for. As they left Jasper's side and stepped back into the crisp air outside, Orion couldn't shake off the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something monumental, a truth that would shatter lives and expose hidden betrayals lurking beneath Maplewood's serene facade. As the investigation into Gideon Voss's death continued, the atmosphere in Maplewood grew increasingly tense. Detective Orion Blake and Officer Mira Chen delved deeper into the lives of those connected to the Voss family, their focus narrowing on Lysandra and her relationship with Tamsin Holloway. It was a connection that, unbeknownst to them, had already begun to unravel in the shadows. Lysandra found herself caught in a whirlwind of grief and guilt. The funeral had been a blur of condolences and sorrowful faces, but as the days passed, she felt a growing emptiness inside her. The thrill of her affair with Tamsin had faded into a haunting memory, replaced by the weight of her husband's absence. She missed Gideon, but she also missed the exhilarating feeling of being truly seen, the connection she had shared with Tamsin. One evening, as rain drummed softly against the windows, Lysandra sat alone in her living room, staring at a photo of Gideon and Jasper on the mantel. A wave of guilt washed over her. She reached for her phone and hesitated before texting Tamsin. "Can we talk?" Moments later, Tamsin replied, "Of course. Can I come over?" The anticipation sent shivers down Lysandra's spine. She quickly tidied up the living room, trying to erase any traces of her turmoil before Tamsin arrived. When the doorbell rang, her heart raced. She opened the door to find Tamsin standing there, drenched from the rain but radiant as ever. "Hey," Tamsin said softly, stepping inside and shaking off her umbrella. "I'm so sorry about Gideon." "Thank you," Lysandra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to handle all of this." Tamsin stepped closer, concern etched on her face. "You don't have to go through it alone." As they settled onto the couch together, Lysandra felt a familiar warmth enveloping her, a sense of safety that she hadn't experienced since Gideon's death. They spoke about their feelings, about grief and loss, but as the conversation deepened, it shifted into something more intimate. "I've missed you," Tamsin admitted, her eyes locking onto Lysandra's with an intensity that made her heart race. "I've missed you too," Lysandra confessed, feeling an undeniable pull toward Tamsin that she couldn't resist any longer. In that moment of vulnerability, their hands brushed together, a spark igniting between them once more. The world outside faded away as they drew closer, lost in each other's gaze. But just as their lips were about to meet, Lysandra pulled back abruptly. "What are we doing?" she whispered, panic flooding her senses. "This isn't right." Tamsin's expression softened with understanding. "I know it feels wrong, but it also feels so right." Lysandra felt torn between desire and guilt. She wanted nothing more than to surrender to this connection but knew that it came with consequences far beyond their own hearts. Before she could respond, the sound of Jasper's footsteps echoed down the hallway, his innocent laughter breaking through their moment like a cold splash of water. Lysandra quickly stood up, smoothing down her dress as if trying to erase any trace of what had almost happened. "Jasper," she called out nervously, "what are you doing home?" "I forgot my soccer ball," he shouted back as he entered the living room. Seeing Jasper burst through the door made Lysandra's heart ache anew. She felt like a stranger in her own home, a mother caught between two worlds, one filled with love for her son and another filled with longing for something forbidden. As Tamsin stood awkwardly by the couch, Jasper noticed her presence and smiled brightly. "Miss Holloway, what are you doing here?" Lysandra forced a smile as she introduced them again, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread settle over her. The moment had slipped away like sand through her fingers. Reality crashed back in hard. After a few minutes of small talk with Jasper about soccer practice and school projects, Tamsin excused herself under the pretense of needing to prepare for classes the next day. As she left, Lysandra felt an ache in her chest, a longing for what could have been mingled with fear for what might come next. Once alone again with Jasper, Lysandra sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. The weight of secrets pressed heavily upon her. She felt trapped in a labyrinth of emotions from which there seemed to be no escape. As night fell over Maplewood and darkness enveloped their home, Lysandra realized that while she had tried to keep two worlds separate, her life as a grieving widow and her secret affair, the walls were beginning to close in around her. The affair was no longer just an escape. It was becoming a dangerous game that threatened to unravel everything she held dear. And deep down inside, she knew that soon enough, those secrets would surface, bringing chaos along with them, and change everything forever. As the investigation into Gideon Voss's death continued, Detective Orion Blake and Officer Mira Chen began to uncover threads that hinted at deeper complexities within the Voss family. The detectives had gathered numerous interviews, but one particular conversation stood out, a casual remark made by Clara Jennings, the teacher who had known Gideon for years. "Did you know he was planning to confront Lysandra about something?" Clara had said, her brow furrowed in concern. He seemed troubled, like he felt there was more going on than he could see. This statement lingered in Orion's mind as he reviewed the case files late one night. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Gideon's death than a simple heart attack. The emotional distance between Gideon and Lysandra, coupled with the whispers of an impending confrontation, suggested a brewing storm. The next day they decided to revisit the Voss home. This time they would focus on Lysandra's phone records. After all, if Gideon had intended to confront her about something significant, it was likely that their communications would reveal tension, perhaps even incriminating evidence. When they arrived, Jasper was at school, leaving Lysandra alone in the house. She greeted them with a weary smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. "Mrs. Voss," Orion began gently, "we need to look into your phone records from the past few weeks. It's standard procedure in cases like this." Lysandra hesitated but ultimately nodded. "Of course, I understand." As she retrieved her phone and handed it over, Mira noticed a slight tremor in Lysandra's hands. The detectives exchanged glances. This was a crucial moment. While Mira began analyzing the texts and call logs, Orion engaged Lysandra in conversation about her relationship with Tamsin. "How well did you know Ms. Holloway?" he asked casually. Lysandra's expression shifted slightly. "She was just Jasper's teacher. We became friends through school events." Orion sensed her defensiveness and pressed on. "Did you ever discuss personal matters?" "No," she replied too quickly. Mira interrupted their conversation as she scanned through the records. "Detective," she called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "You need to see this." Orion stepped over to where Mira stood, his heart racing as she pointed to a series of texts exchanged between Lysandra and Tamsin just days before Gideon's death. The messages were laden with emotion, longing intertwined with anxiety, as they discussed their feelings for each other amidst the backdrop of Gideon's increasing suspicion. Orion felt a chill run down his spine. They had struck gold. This evidence could change everything, turning their investigation from a tragic accident into something far more sinister. As the implications of what they had uncovered settled in, Orion knew they were on the brink of revealing a truth that would shake Maplewood to its core, a truth that could unravel lives and expose hidden betrayals lurking beneath the surface. The atmosphere in Maplewood shifted dramatically as Detective Orion Blake and Officer Mira Chen pieced together the evidence against Lysandra Voss. The text messages exchanged between her and Tamsin Holloway were damning, revealing a clandestine affair that had spiraled into a web of deceit and betrayal. The detectives knew they had enough to act. On a chilly December morning, they arrived at the Voss home to make the arrest. Lysandra was alone, preparing breakfast for Jasper, who would soon be returning from school. The doorbell rang, and when she opened it, she was met with the somber faces of Orion and Mira. "Mrs. Voss," Orion said, his voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." Lysandra's heart raced as she sensed the gravity of the moment. "What's going on?" "We have evidence linking you to your husband's death," Mira stated bluntly. "You're under arrest for suspicion of murder." Shock washed over Lysandra's face. "Murder? No, you don't understand." "Please come with us," Orion interrupted gently but firmly. As they escorted her out of the house, the weight of the world seemed to crash down upon her. The reality of her choices loomed large. She had been living a double life, and now it was all unraveling before her eyes. The news spread quickly through Maplewood, sending shockwaves through the community. Friends and neighbors struggled to comprehend how a devoted mother could be implicated in such a heinous crime. The whispers grew louder as details emerged about her affair with Tamsin. The trial began months later, drawing attention from local media and residents alike. Lysandra sat in the defendant's chair, her expression a mix of defiance and despair as she faced the courtroom filled with familiar faces. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman driven by passion and jealousy, suggesting that Gideon's impending confrontation about her affair had pushed her over the edge. Defense attorney Quentin Hale argued that there was no direct evidence linking Lysandra to Gideon's death, only circumstantial evidence fueled by speculation. As witnesses took the stand, friends who spoke of Gideon's loving nature and others who testified about Lysandra's emotional state, the tension in the courtroom escalated. Each testimony seemed to peel back layers of Lysandra's life, exposing vulnerabilities that left her feeling raw and exposed. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that the affair with Tamsin would haunt Lysandra throughout the proceedings, casting shadows over every argument made in her defense. With each passing day, Lysandra felt herself slipping further into despair, a woman trapped by her own choices, facing an uncertain future while grappling with the haunting memories of love lost and lives shattered. As the jury deliberated, she could only hope for mercy in a world that had turned against her. The jury's verdict echoed through the courtroom, a heavy silence settling over the room as they pronounced Lysandra Voss guilty of manslaughter. The weight of her choices crashed down upon her like a tidal wave, leaving her to grapple with the reality of her actions and the life that lay in ruins. As she was led away in handcuffs, Lysandra caught a glimpse of Jasper's tear-streaked face in the crowd. The pain in his eyes pierced her heart. She had shattered their family, leaving him to navigate a world forever altered by her decisions. In the months that followed, Maplewood struggled to heal from the scandal that had rocked its foundations. Tamsin, facing her own repercussions, left town, leaving behind whispers of betrayal and heartbreak. Lysandra spent her days in prison reflecting on love's complexities and the devastating consequences of hidden desires. She realized that while passion can ignite a flame, it can also burn everything to ashes. As she stared out at the distant horizon from her cell, Lysandra understood that redemption would be a long journey, one that began with acknowledging the pain she had caused and seeking forgiveness from those she loved most. A truth in crime case solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.